we start working in more like artificial landscape related with some, let's say, visual experience and some interface between the space that you live and the natural landscape around the territory. I like very much to discover the beauty of landscapes that normally are destroyed when the city is growing. No? We think on the idea of micro landscape in front of macro landscape. So you can find places that the landscape in a big scale is horrible because it has been destroyed by many constructions, but if you look in the micro scale, you can find some incredible quality of water, some incredible stones. The mountains are horrible, but the stones are great. No? So we like to very much to think about some kind of human experience about what you are able to touch, what are you able to look around. And obviously some of these ideas we have been able to work in other scales and other kind of projects more related with the fractal approach about the architecture. I did a trip crossing Spain from north to south, I remember in the year 97, and I remember that I saw some Roman construction, very old, that were interesting. But in general, all the contemporary cities were completely disaster. That's a telephone. So all the I did a trip from crossing Spain from north to south, 1,000 kilometers. I was like 3 days driving. I didn't see any contemporary building that was great, but I saw hundreds of incredible landscape that I like it. So at that moment we start to think about why not to try to interact more with the nature. The landscape was an important question of debate at the late 80s and beginning of the 90s, but it was more like a kind of feel to the action than not the object itself. What we did was to try to learn from the landscape from its individual parts. We are looking to mountains like buildings, we are looking at trees like buildings, we are looking to rocks as part of a multi-scalar approach to architecture. So if landscape in, let's say, modern architecture is more like a kind of visual environment that surrounds an artificial space, for us what we see in the landscape is our actual material to learn about how to make architecture. For me, nature is not a metaphor. Many people are using nature as a metaphor, as something to be inspired or whatever. For me, the question in this moment that we are is to define what is architecture and what is architecture for. 5,000 years ago, the people didn't have architecture, they were using in caves, and they were using nature as part of their living environment, of his habitat. The city was the nature, because they were not cities somehow. So during 3,000 years we have been generating some artificial environments for living. In general, city and architecture was creating opposition to nature and to some non-controlled environment. Well, from my point of view, the next step is going back to the nature. That means to think about every kind of construction that we do, every kind of material transformation that we do as part of the nature or as part of the habitat. No? So the question is that in order to do this, you need to understand, on one hand, the process that are behind the natural systems, the ecology that you can discover in a forest. I mean, a tree is product of millions of years of evolution. And a tree is much more intelligent than any kind of building that we ever did. So the question is not to think on architecture something to be inspired by the nature, but is the nature something that you can learn the process, etc., in order to develop your own projects. And obviously, the geometry is also something that we must learn. I think that we are in a very initial situation where we are learning about the geometry and we are learning about the process. The fractal geometry and the use of computers, the use of machines for digital fabrications allow to produce forms that we could never imagine. Forms that are completely rational, but they are not cubes. They are not Euclidean forms. They are follow fractal geometry or some others. So the question is that we are now in, from my point of view, in a transition moment where we are trying to learn how the nature really works, using information in order to map all these processes around the natural process, and using geometry in order to be able to design new buildings and new kind of architecture. I mean, we start to talk about geography, not anymore about landscape. Geography is any kind of map on the geological environment. That means into the planet on different effects. For example, the mountains are a geological transformation, but the city is also a geographical action by the manipulation of the people. A city is like a lake that was produced in a natural way, but a city has been produced in an artificial way. And also the relations of people in one place also can be defined as a geographical situation. Geography means mapping on the territory effects of different environments, geological, physical, urban, etc. So from that point of view, what we are trying to do is to learn. We were very much inspired by what Christopher Alexander did about the patterns on architecture. He was trying to see what we can learn from the old architecture, what are the good phenomena in order to define kind of abstract patterns that anyone can use in order to do architectural projects. And what we did was to try to look to the nature, to the process that we see over there, to the geometry that we see over there, to the relations that we see there, in order to try to define some new logics based on the nature or based on the geography. And in relation with this, obviously the idea of arborescence and the idea of tree structures are part of the history of architecture, like in the Gothic architecture, and are part of the natural history. And we are trying to develop, we have developed different projects of tree structures. The last one that we are doing is some kind of micro climate environment, making umbrellas structure. This is only one, but the project we are doing in Taiwan has some pillar and some umbrellas that provoke the natural ventilation, and we are doing this by trying to follow some, by trying to stimulate the natural environment through Metropolitan loft. It was the idea of bringing a loft to the periphery of the city in order to create a very big space, very flexible, and where maybe the most important space was the discovering of the landscape that we could generate in the top of the building. So this idea of creating landscape, artificial landscape related with the living environment, I think that is something crucial in some of the projects we did.